The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Command facility in Coronado, California. Sarah Martinez adjusted her civilian clothes nervously as she approached the main gate, her Pentagon identification card trembling slightly in her hand. At 28 years old, she had spent the last 6 years working as a ballistics analyst for the Department of Defense, but today would mark her first visit to an active SEAL training facility. The security guard examined her credentials with practiced efficiency before waving her through. Sarah's mission was straightforward on paper, but complex in execution. Evaluate the effectiveness of a new rifle system that the Navy was considering for adoption by their elite units. Her expertise in ballistics and weapons systems had earned her this assignment, despite her lack of field experience with special operations units. As she walked toward the administrative building, Sarah couldn't help but notice the intense physical training taking place around her. Groups of muscular men in military fatigues ran past carrying heavy equipment, their faces set in expressions of determined focus. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed from the nearby shooting ranges, punctuated by shouted command from instructors. Colonel James Harrison was waiting for her in his office, a spacious room decorated with military memorabilia and photographs from various deployments around the world. At 52 years old, Harrison had spent over 3 decades in special operations, rising through the ranks to become one of the most respected officers in the SEAL community. His weathered face bore the marks of countless missions in hostile environments, and his steel-gray eyes seemed to assess everyone who entered his domain. "Ms. Martinez," he said, rising from his desk to shake her hand. His grip was firm and calloused, the handshake of a man who had handled weapons and equipment for most of his adult life. "I understand you're here to evaluate our potential new rifle system." Sarah nodded, setting her briefcase down carefully. "Yes, sir. I've reviewed the technical specifications extensively, but I need to observe the weapon in actual field conditions to complete my assessment." The colonel's expression remained neutral, but Sarah detected a hint of skepticism in his eyes. She had encountered this reaction before in military settings. Her appearance often worked against her in these environments. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slender build, she looked more like a college student than a weapons expert. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her wire-rimmed glasses gave her an academic appearance that contrasted sharply with the military atmosphere surrounding them. "The weapon you're evaluating is currently being tested by our most experienced operators," Harrison explained, gesturing toward a wall map that showed various training areas on the base. "These men have been using the rifle system for the past 2 weeks, putting it through scenarios that simulate real-world combat conditions." He paused, studying her carefully. "I have to ask, Ms. Martinez, how much practical experience do you have with firearms? Reading about ballistics in a laboratory setting is quite different from understanding how a weapon performs under stress." The question wasn't entirely unexpected, but it still stung slightly. Sarah had faced similar challenges throughout her career, constantly having to prove that her knowledge was more than theoretical. "I have extensive experience with firearms testing, Colonel. While my work has primarily been in controlled environments, I understand the principles that govern weapon performance under various conditions." Colonel Harrison walked to his window, which overlooked one of the main firing ranges. Below them, a group of SEAL trainees were conducting marksmanship drills under the watchful eye of their instructors. The sharp crack of rifle fire filled the air in steady, rhythmic patterns. "Those men down there," he said, pointing toward the range, "represent some of the finest marksmen in the world. They've spent thousands of hours perfecting their shooting skills under conditions that most people couldn't imagine. Each one of them has proven themselves in actual combat situations where accuracy means the difference between life and death." He turned back to face her, his expression serious. "I'm not questioning your expertise in ballistics, Ms. Martinez, but evaluating a weapon system for special operations use requires understanding nuances that can only be appreciated through practical experience." Sarah felt her cheeks flush slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I understand your concerns, Colonel, but I believe my analytical approach can provide valuable insights that complement the field experience of your operators." The colonel's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. After a brief exchange with the caller, he hung up and turned back to Sarah. It seems the timing is perfect. The team testing your rifle system is about to begin their afternoon session. Would you like to observe them in action? They left his office and walked across the base toward the firing range complex. The facility was impressive in its scope and sophistication. Multiple ranges were designed to accommodate different types of training, from basic marksmanship to complex combat scenarios that included moving targets and simulated urban environments. As they approached the main range, Sarah could see a group of 12 SEALs preparing their equipment. These were not trainees, but experienced operators, men who had completed multiple deployments and earned their place among the elite. Their movements were efficient and precise as they checked their weapons and adjusted their gear. Master Chief Petty Officer David "Tank" Thompson was leading the session. At 6 feet 3 inches and weighing over 200 pounds, he commanded immediate attention wherever he went. His nickname had been earned not just through his imposing physical presence, but also through his reputation for being nearly unstoppable in combat situations. "Gentlemen," Tank announced to his team, "we have a visitor from the Pentagon today. Ms. Martinez is here to evaluate the new rifle system we've been testing." The SEALs glanced in Sarah's direction with polite but distant acknowledgement. She could sense their skepticism, though they were too professional to express it openly. These men were accustomed to working with military personnel who share their background and experience. A civilian analyst, particularly one who appeared so young and inexperienced, was clearly outside their normal frame of reference. Colonel Harrison stepped forward to address the group. "I want you men to conduct your standard evaluation protocol. Ms. Martinez will observe and take notes for her report." The session began with static targets shooting at various distances. Sarah watched carefully as each SEAL took his turn with a new rifle system. The weapon was an advanced variant of the standard military rifle, featuring improved ergonomics, enhanced accuracy, and reduced weight. On paper, it represented a significant advancement over existing systems. The SEALs' performance was impressive by any standard. Their shots were consistently accurate, and they demonstrated remarkable proficiency with the new weapon despite having used it for only a few weeks. Sarah took detailed notes on their techniques, observing how they adapted to the rifle's unique characteristics. However, as she watched, Sarah began to notice patterns that troubled her. Several of the operators were unconsciously compensating for what appeared to be a slight inconsistency in the weapon's performance. Their shooting stances and grip adjustments suggested they were dealing with issues that weren't immediately apparent to a casual observer. "Excuse me," Sarah said during a brief break in the exercise, addressing Master Chief Thompson. "I've noticed that several of your men are making similar adjustments to their shooting technique. Are you experiencing any specific challenges with the weapon system?" Tank looked at her with surprise. He hadn't expected her to pick up on the subtle issues they had been working through. "There are a few minor quirks we're still adapting to," he admitted. "Nothing that can't be overcome with proper training." Colonel Harrison stepped closer, interested in this exchange. "What kind of quirks are we talking about, Tank?" "The rifle has a tendency to pull slightly to the right after sustained fire," Tank explained. "It's probably related to barrel heating, but we've been working around it by adjusting our aim points." Sarah frowned, making additional notes. This was exactly the type of issue that her ballistic analysis was designed to identify. How many rounds does it typically take before this deviation becomes noticeable? "Usually around 50 to 60 rounds of continuous fire," one of the other SEALs answered. "It's not a major problem, but it's something you have to account for." This information was crucial for Sarah's evaluation. A weapon intended for special operations use needed to maintain consistent accuracy even under the stress of extended firefights. The fact that the rifle's performance degraded after sustained use was a significant concern that needed to be addressed. "Would it be possible for me to examine the weapon more closely?" Sarah asked. "I might be able to identify the specific cause of the accuracy drift." Tank and Colonel Harrison exchanged glances. It was unusual for a civilian analyst to request hands-on access to equipment during active training exercises. I suppose that would be acceptable, the colonel said after a moment's consideration. But I want one of my men supervising at all times. Sarah approached the rifle with professional interest, her academic training taking over as she examined the weapon's construction and design features. She noted the quality of the materials and the precision of the manufacturing, but also began to identify potential areas where problems might develop. As she handled the rifle, checking the barrel alignment and examining the mounting system for the various accessories, the SEALs watched with growing curiosity. Her movements were confident and knowledgeable, suggesting a familiarity with firearms that went beyond mere theoretical understanding. The barrel-to-stock interface looks like it might be the issue, Sarah observed, running her fingers along a specific joint. This type of mounting system can create stress points that affect accuracy as the metal expands from heat. Tank moved closer to see what she was pointing out. Despite his initial skepticism about her practical knowledge, he was beginning to recognize that she understood firearms at a deeper level than he had expected. "How much experience do you actually have with weapons, ma'am?" he asked, his tone more respectful than before. Sarah looked up from her examination of the rifle. "More than most people realize," she said simply. "My father was a competitive shooter, and I grew up around firearms. My academic training in ballistics built on that foundation." This revelation seemed to shift the dynamic of the group slightly. The SEALs had assumed she was purely an academic with no practical experience. Learning that she had a background in shooting sports gave her more credibility in their eyes. Colonel Harrison checked his watch. "We're running behind schedule," he announced. "Let's move on to the next phase of testing." The afternoon session was designed to evaluate the rifle's performance under more stressful conditions. The SEALs would engage moving targets while navigating obstacles, simulating the type of complex shooting scenarios they might encounter in actual operations. As the exercise began, Sarah continued to observe and take notes. The weapon's performance issues became more apparent under these demanding conditions. Several shots that should have been easy hits for operators of this caliber were missing their targets by small, but significant margins. The session continued for another hour, with the SEALs demonstrating their remarkable skill and adaptability despite the weapon's limitations. Sarah documented everything carefully, building a comprehensive picture of how the rifle performed under various conditions. As the training concluded and the SEALs began cleaning their equipment, Master Chief Thompson approached Sarah. "I have to admit, ma'am, you caught some things that we've been dealing with but hadn't fully analyzed. Your observations about the barrel stock interface make a lot of sense." Colonel Harrison overheard this comment and walked over to join them. "It sounds like your evaluation is proving valuable already, Ms. Martinez. What's your preliminary assessment?" Sarah closed her notebook and considered her response carefully. "The weapon has some excellent design features, but there are definitely issues that need to be addressed before it should be approved for operational use. The accuracy degradation after sustained fire is a significant concern for special operations applications." "And you believe you've identified the cause?" the colonel asked. "I have some strong theories that I'd like to test," Sarah replied. "But I'll need to conduct some additional analysis to be certain." As they walked back toward the administrative building, Colonel Harrison's attitude toward Sarah had noticeably changed. Her professional observations had earned her a measure of respect that hadn't been present during their initial meeting. "I'll have to say, Ms. Martinez, your approach is more thorough than I expected. Most analysts who come through here focus on technical specifications without paying attention to real-world performance issues." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she could sense that she was still being evaluated as much as the weapon system itself. These men were protective of their domain and naturally suspicious of outsiders who claimed expertise in areas they considered their own. "I believe the best analysis comes from combining theoretical knowledge with practical observation," she said. "Tomorrow I'd like to conduct some controlled tests to verify my hypotheses about the accuracy issues." "That can be arranged," Colonel Harrison replied. "Tank can provide you with access to the range and any equipment you need." As the day came to an end, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism about her progress. She had begun to establish her credibility with the SEAL team, and her initial observations had identified important issues with the weapon system. However, she was aware that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ride back to her hotel gave Sarah time to reflect on the day's events. The SEALs were clearly exceptional warriors with skills that commanded genuine respect. Their initial skepticism toward her had been based on reasonable assumptions about civilian analysts who typically visited their facility. However, Sarah knew that her success in this assignment would depend on more than just technical knowledge. She needed to demonstrate that her analysis could provide practical value to operators whose lives depended on their equipment performing flawlessly under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The stakes were higher than just completing a routine evaluation report. The weapon system under consideration would potentially be used by some of America's most elite warriors in situations where equipment failure could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As she prepared for the next day's testing, Sarah reviewed her notes and planned her approach for the controlled experiments she wanted to conduct. She had identified several specific areas that needed investigation, and she was confident that her analysis would provide valuable insights. But first, she needed to continue building trust with the SEAL team. Their cooperation would be essential for conducting the types of tests that would give her the data she needed to complete her evaluation properly. The next morning arrived with typical Southern California clarity, the sky a brilliant blue without a single cloud to mar its perfection. Sarah arrived at the base early, determined to make the most of her second day of evaluation. She had spent much of the previous evening reviewing technical specifications and planning the controlled test she wanted to conduct. Master Chief Thompson was already at the range when she arrived, along with several of his team members. The early morning light cast long shadows across the facility, and the air still held the cool freshness that would soon give way to the day's heat. "Morning, ma'am." Tank greeted her with professional courtesy. "I understand you want to run some specific tests today." Sarah nodded, setting down her equipment case. "I need to isolate the variables that are causing the accuracy issues we observed yesterday. That means conducting controlled shots under specific conditions while monitoring barrel temperature and other factors." She had brought additional equipment from her office, including digital thermometers designed to measure barrel temperature and chronographs to measure bullet velocity. These tools would allow her to gather precise data about the weapon's performance under various conditions. "How can we help?" asked Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez, one of the team's designated marksmen. Rodriguez had earned his reputation through exceptional performance in multiple combat deployments, and his opinion carried significant weight within a group. "I need a shooter who can maintain consistent technique while I collect data," Sarah explained. "Someone whose personal variables won't interfere with measuring the weapon's performance." Tank gestured toward Rodriguez. "Marcus is probably your best bet. He's got the steadiest shooting style on the team, and he's got enough experience to maintain consistency even when conditions change." They set up at the 300-yard range, with Sarah positioning her monitoring equipment to capture detailed information about each shot. Her plan was to fire controlled groups of shots while systematically varying the conditions to identify exactly when and why the weapon's accuracy began to degrade. The first series of tests confirmed her initial suspicions. During the first 20 rounds, the rifle performed exceptionally well, with Rodriguez placing shots within a very tight group that would have been impressive even with the most advanced sniper rifles. However, as the barrel heated up, the point of impact began to shift in a predictable pattern. "There," Sarah said, pointing to the target after the 30th round. "See how the shots are starting to move to the right? It's not Marcus's technique, it's the weapon itself." The SEALs gathered around the target, examining the shot pattern with professional interest. The shift was subtle but undeniable, exactly the type of issue that could cause problems during extended engagements. "How much drift are we talking about?" Tank asked, studying the measurements Sarah had marked on the target. "At this range, about 3 inches after 50 rounds," Sarah replied, checking her temperature readings. "That might not sound like much, but at longer ranges or in situations requiring precision shots, it could be the difference between hitting and missing a critical target." Rodriguez lowered the rifle and looked thoughtful. We noticed this during training, but we figured it was just something to compensate for. You're saying it's a design flaw? Sarah nodded. The barrel-to-stock interface I examined yesterday creates stress points as the metal expands. The mounting system isn't allowing for proper thermal expansion, which causes the barrel to bend slightly under heat stress. She pulled out her notebook and showed them a detailed diagram she had sketched. See this mounting point here? As the barrel heats up, it tries to expand, but this rigid connection forces the expansion to occur in an uneven pattern. That's what's causing the point of impact to shift. The technical explanation seemed to resonate with the operators. These were men who understood their equipment intimately, and Sarah's analysis provided insight into problems they had experienced but couldn't fully explain. So what's the fix? Tank asked. Is this something that can be corrected, or is it a fundamental design problem? It's correctable, Sarah assured him, but it would require some modifications to the mounting system. The question is whether the manufacturer will be willing to make those changes and how much they would cost to implement. Colonel Harrison arrived at the range as they were discussing these findings. He had been monitoring the progress of the evaluation and was particularly interested in Sarah's technical assessment. What's the verdict so far? He asked, joining the group around the target. Sarah summarized her findings, explaining the accuracy degradation and its probable cause. The colonel listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the implications for operational use. How significant is this issue in practical terms? He wanted to know. Would it prevent effective use of the weapon in actual combat situations? That depends on the specific mission requirements, Sarah replied. For close-quarters combat or situations involving limited ammunition expenditure, it might not be a major factor. But for operations requiring sustained fire or precision shooting at extended ranges, it could definitely impact effectiveness. Tank interjected with a practical perspective. In most of the situations we operate in, we need our weapons to perform consistently regardless of how much we've fired. If a rifle starts to lose accuracy after 50 rounds, that's a problem we can't afford. The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of another group of SEALs who were scheduled to use the range for their own training. As they began setting up their equipment, Sarah noticed something that caught her attention. One of the new arrivals was Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison, a young operator who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. Despite his youth, Morrison moved with the same confident precision as the more experienced team members. What caught Sarah's attention was his casual comment about the rifle they had been testing. "Oh, you guys are still working with that problematic rifle," Morrison said, recognizing the weapon. "My team tested it last week. We had some issues with it too." Colonel Harrison stepped forward with interest. "What kind of issues did your team experience?" Morrison described problems that were remarkably similar to what Sarah had documented, including the accuracy drift and some additional concerns about the weapon's reliability under harsh environmental conditions. This information suggested that the issues weren't isolated incidents, but systematic problems with a rifle design. "Did your team document these problems?" Sarah asked. "We mentioned them in our after-action report," Morrison replied, "but I don't think anyone connected all the dots. Each team just worked around the issues they encountered." This revelation highlighted an important communication gap in the evaluation process. Different teams had encountered similar problems, but hadn't shared their experiences in a way that would have revealed the systematic nature of the issues. Sarah made extensive notes about this discovery. It demonstrated the value of having a centralized analysis approach that could identify patterns across multiple test groups. Individual teams might adapt to equipment problems without fully understanding their implications for widespread adoption. "Colonel," Sarah said, "I think it would be valuable to interview representatives from each team that has tested this weapon. I suspect we'll find that the problems we've identified are more widespread than initially apparent." Harrison nodded approvingly. "I can arrange that. Tank, can you coordinate with the other team leaders to set up brief sessions with Ms. Martinez?" As the morning progressed, Sarah continued her controlled testing while Tank arranged for her to speak with operators from the other teams. Each conversation revealed additional details about the weapon's performance issues, building a comprehensive picture of its limitations. By noon, Sarah had accumulated substantial evidence that the rifle system had significant problems that would need to be addressed before it could be approved for operational use. However, she also wanted to conduct one final test that would demonstrate the weapon's potential if the design flaws were corrected. "I'd like to try something," she announced to the group that had gathered to observe her testing. "I want to see how the weapon performs when we eliminate the thermal stress issue." She explained her plan to modify the mounting system temporarily, using some materials from the base's maintenance shop to create a more flexible connection between the barrel and stock. It would be a crude modification, but it should demonstrate whether her analysis of the problem was correct. Tank looked skeptical. "You want to modify a test weapon? Are you sure that's a good idea?" "It's a temporary modification that won't cause permanent damage," Sarah assured him. "And if I'm right about the cause of the accuracy problems, this should eliminate them." Colonel Harrison considered the proposal carefully. "What kind of modification are we talking about?" Sarah sketched out her plan, showing how she could create a more flexible mounting system that would allow for proper thermal expansion. The modification involved replacing one of the rigid mounting points with a spring-loaded connection that would maintain stability while accommodating the expansion of heated metal. "It's actually a fairly simple concept," she explained. "The original design prioritized rigidity over thermal compensation. By allowing for controlled movement in one specific direction, we can maintain accuracy while accommodating the natural expansion of the barrel." The modification took about an hour to complete, with Sarah working alongside one of the base's armorers who had experience with custom weapon modifications. The result wasn't aesthetically perfect, but it should serve to test her theory about the accuracy problems. When they returned to the range for testing, there was a noticeably larger audience than before. Word had spread about the civilian analyst who was conducting hands-on modifications to military equipment, and several off-duty SEALs had come to observe the results. Rodriguez took his position at the firing line, and they repeated the controlled test protocol they had used earlier. The first 20 rounds performed as expected, with excellent accuracy and tight shot groups. But as they continued beyond the 50-round mark where problems had previously appeared, the accuracy remained consistent. "Well, I'll be damned," Tank muttered, examining the target through his binoculars. "The shots are still grouping tight even after 70 rounds. The assembled SEALs gathered around the target to examine the results. The difference was dramatic and unmistakable. Where the original mounting system had produced a steady drift in accuracy as the barrel heated, the modified version maintained consistent performance throughout the extended firing sequence. Colonel Harrison studied the target with obvious interest. "This is impressive work, Ms. Martinez. You've not only identified the problem, but demonstrated a practical solution." Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction, but she was careful not to let it show too much. "The principle is sound, but this is just a proof of concept. A production solution would need to be much more refined and thoroughly tested. But it proves that the fundamental design can be salvaged," the colonel asked. "Absolutely," Sarah confirmed. "With the right modifications, this could be an excellent weapon system. The basic design is solid. It just needs some engineering refinements to address the thermal expansion issues." As the group dispersed, Tank approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "I have to admit, ma'am, when you first showed up yesterday, I didn't expect much from a Pentagon analyst. Most of the people they send us are more concerned with paperwork than practical performance." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but remained modest in her response. "I've been fortunate to have good training and practical experience to build on, but I also learned a lot from observing your team's expertise. Speaking of which," Tank continued, "we've got one more phase of testing scheduled for this afternoon. It's a practical exercise that simulates real-world combat conditions. Would you like to observe?" The afternoon exercise was designed to test the weapon's performance under stress conditions that closely mimicked actual combat scenarios. The SEALs would navigate a complex course while engaging multiple targets under time pressure, carrying full combat loads, and wearing complete tactical gear. As Sarah watched the exercise unfold, she was struck by the incredible skill and physical conditioning required for this type of operation. The operators moved through the course with fluid efficiency, transitioning between different shooting positions while maintaining accuracy that would have been impressive under static conditions. The modified rifle performed well during the exercise, maintaining its improved accuracy even under the demanding conditions. However, Sarah also observed some additional issues that weren't related to the thermal expansion problem she had solved. The trigger mechanism seems to have some inconsistency, she noted to Tank as they watched Rodriguez navigate a particularly challenging section of the course. There's a slight variation in trigger pull weight that's affecting shot timing. Tank raised his binoculars to get a closer look. You can see that from here? I can see Rodriguez making micro adjustments to his trigger technique, Sarah explained. It's subtle, but he's having to compensate for variations in how the trigger breaks. This observation led to another detailed examination of the weapon system after the exercise concluded. Sarah's analysis revealed that the trigger mechanism had some manufacturing tolerances that were acceptable for standard military rifles, but not ideal for precision applications. How many issues does this weapon have? Rodriguez asked with frustration after they had identified the trigger problem. Actually, these are fairly common problems with new weapon systems, Sarah assured him. The important thing is that they're all correctable with proper engineering attention. Colonel Harrison had remained quiet during most of the afternoon testing, but as the day drew to a close, he approached Sarah for a private conversation. Ms. Martinez, I have to say that your evaluation has been more thorough and practical than anything we've received from previous analysts. You've not only identified problems, but demonstrated solutions. Sarah nodded acknowledgement. Thank you, Colonel. I believe that effective evaluation requires understanding both the technical aspects and the practical requirements. I'm curious about something, he continued. Your technical knowledge is obviously solid, but your practical insights suggest more hands-on experience than most analysts possess. What's your background with firearms? This was the question Sarah had been expecting since her arrival. I grew up in a military family, Colonel. My father was an Army marksman before he became a competitive shooter. I learned to shoot almost before I could ride a bicycle. Harrison's expression showed interest. Competition shooting is quite different from military applications. True, Sarah agreed, but the fundamentals of accuracy and precision are the same, and my academic training in ballistics gave me the theoretical framework to understand why things work the way they do. Have you maintained your shooting skills over the years? Sarah hesitated slightly before answering. I still compete occasionally in civilian matches. It helps me stay connected to the practical side of ballistics. This conversation would prove to be more significant than either of them realized at the time. The colonel was forming an impression of Sarah that would influence the events of the following day, when her evaluation would take an unexpected and dramatic turn. The third day of Sarah's evaluation began with an unexpected request from Colonel Harrison. When she arrived at his office that morning, she found him studying a detailed report that she assumed contained the preliminary findings from her testing. Ms. Martinez, he said, looking up from the document, I've been reviewing your analysis from the past 2 days, and I have to say it's the most comprehensive weapon evaluation I've seen in 20 years of military service. Sarah felt pleased by the recognition, but she sensed there was more to this conversation than simple acknowledgement of her work. However, the colonel continued, I've received some pushback from the manufacturer regarding your findings. They're questioning whether the problems you've identified are real issues or simply the result of improper use by inexperienced personnel. This response didn't surprise Sarah. Weapons manufacturers had significant financial investments in their products and were often reluctant to acknowledge design flaws that might require expensive modifications or could jeopardize large military contracts. What specific concerns have they raised? She asked. Colonel Harrison slid a formal letter across his desk. The document bore the letterhead of Titan Defense Systems, the company that had developed the rifle under evaluation. The language was diplomatically phrased, but clearly challenged the validity of Sarah's technical assessment. They're essentially saying that the problems you identified are the result of testing methodology that doesn't reflect proper military use, Harrison explained. They claim that their own testing showed no accuracy degradation under normal operating conditions. Sarah read through the letter carefully, noting the specific technical arguments the manufacturer had made. Several of their points were based on testing protocols that differed significantly from the real-world conditions she had observed during the SEAL exercises. Their testing was conducted under laboratory conditions that don't account for the stress factors present in actual operations, she observed. They used controlled firing schedules that allowed for cooling periods between shot strings, which would mask the thermal expansion problems I documented. That's what I suspected, the colonel replied, but they're insisting on a demonstration to prove their point. They want to send their chief engineer to conduct a side-by-side comparison between their testing methods and yours. This development added an interesting dimension to Sarah's evaluation. She was confident in her findings, but she also understood the political and financial pressures involved in major weapons procurement decisions. When are they planning to conduct this demonstration? She asked. This afternoon, Harrison replied. Their representative is flying in from the company headquarters this morning. I wanted to give you advance notice so you could prepare your response. Sarah spent the morning reviewing her data and preparing for what she anticipated would be a challenging technical debate. The manufacturer's challenge represented exactly the type of situation where her combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience would be put to the test. Dr. Richard Caldwell arrived at the base shortly after lunch, accompanied by 2 technical assistants and several cases of specialized equipment. At 45 years old, Caldwell had spent over 2 decades in weapons development, first with the military and then in the private sector. His reputation as an expert in rifle design was well established within the defense industry. The initial meeting was cordial but tense. Dr. Caldwell was clearly confident in his position and seemed somewhat dismissive of Sarah's findings. His attitude suggested that he viewed the situation as a routine matter of correcting misunderstandings rather than addressing genuine technical problems. Ms. Martinez, he said during their introduction, I understand you've identified some concerns with our rifle system. I'm hoping we can clear up any confusion through proper testing protocols. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor despite detecting a condescending tone in his voice. I'd be happy to demonstrate the issues I've documented, Dr. Caldwell. I think you'll find the problems are quite reproducible. They gathered at the main firing range along with Colonel Harrison, Tank Thompson, and several other SEALs who had participated in the previous testing. Dr. Caldwell's team set up their equipment with practiced efficiency, while Sarah prepared her own monitoring devices. We'll conduct this evaluation using our standard test protocol, Dr. Caldwell announced. This method has been validated through extensive laboratory testing and represents the proper way to assess rifle performance. His testing method involved firing precisely controlled shot strings with mandatory cooling periods between each group. The protocol was designed to prevent excessive barrel heating and maintain consistent conditions throughout the evaluation. This approach ensures that we're measuring the rifle's inherent accuracy rather than the effects of improper use, Dr. Caldwell explained as his team prepared the first firing sequence. Sarah watched the demonstration with professional interest but growing concern. While Dr. Caldwell's method would indeed show the rifle's accuracy under ideal conditions, it completely failed to address the real-world performance issues that special operations units would encounter. The results of Dr. Caldwell's testing were impressive. The rifle maintained excellent accuracy throughout the controlled firing sequence, with no evidence of the drift problems that Sarah had documented. From a purely technical standpoint, his test demonstrated that the weapon could perform extremely well under carefully controlled conditions. As you can see, Dr. Caldwell concluded, when proper firing protocols are followed, our rifle system maintains exceptional accuracy. The problems you reported are likely the result of exceeding the weapon's intended usage parameters. Colonel Harrison looked thoughtful as he examined the targets from Dr. Caldwell's test. The accuracy was undeniably impressive, and the complete absence of the problems Sarah had identified raised questions about the validity of her concerns. Ms. Martinez, the colonel said, how do you reconcile these results with your previous findings? Sarah had anticipated this moment and was prepared with her response. Dr. Caldwell's testing demonstrates the rifle's potential under ideal conditions, but it doesn't address the performance requirements for special operations use. She gestured toward the SEALs who were observing the demonstration. These operators need weapons that maintain accuracy under the stress of actual combat conditions. That includes sustained fire, rapid temperature changes, and extended operations without maintenance breaks. Our rifle is designed to meet all standard military specifications, Dr. Caldwell countered. If users exceed those parameters, they can't expect optimal performance. Tank Thompson stepped forward at this point, his expression serious. Doctor, with respect, in combat we don't get to follow laboratory protocols. When we're under fire, we shoot as much as necessary for as long as necessary. A weapon that loses accuracy after 50 rounds isn't acceptable for our operations. This comment highlighted the fundamental disconnect between laboratory testing and operational requirements. Dr. Caldwell's approach prioritized ideal performance under controlled conditions, while Sarah's evaluation focused on real-world effectiveness under stress. Perhaps we could conduct a practical demonstration, Sarah suggested. We could compare the rifle's performance under Dr. Caldwell's protocol versus the conditions that special operations units would actually encounter. Colonel Harrison nodded approval. That sounds like a reasonable approach. Doctor, would you be willing to test your weapon under our operational scenarios? Dr. Caldwell agreed, though Sarah could see he was beginning to realize that the discussion was moving beyond his preferred testing parameters. The challenge now was to demonstrate the weapon's limitations under realistic conditions while maintaining scientific objectivity. They set up a comprehensive test that combined elements of both approaches. The first phase used Dr. Caldwell's controlled protocol, while the second phase replicated the sustained firing conditions that Sarah had used in her original evaluation. During the controlled phase, the rifle performed exactly as Dr. Caldwell had predicted. Accuracy was excellent, and no problems were apparent. However, as they transitioned to the sustained firing test, the familiar pattern of accuracy degradation began to emerge. There, Sarah pointed out as the shots began to drift after the 40th round. This is exactly what I documented in my original testing. Dr. Caldwell studied the target with growing concern. The shift in point of impact was undeniable, and it occurred under conditions that were well within the normal range of military operations. This is unexpected, he admitted. Our laboratory testing didn't reveal this pattern. Sarah explained her analysis of the thermal expansion problem, showing Dr. Caldwell the specific mounting points where stress was causing the accuracy drift. As a fellow engineer, he quickly understood the technical issues she was describing. The barrel-to-stock interface, he muttered, examining the rifle's construction with new attention to the problem areas Sarah had identified. We designed it for maximum rigidity, but we didn't account for differential thermal expansion under sustained fire. The demonstration continued with Sarah showing the modified mounting system she had developed. The improvement in performance was dramatic and immediately apparent to everyone present, including Dr. Caldwell. Your modification eliminates the accuracy drift, he observed, studying the target results with professional admiration. This is elegant engineering. The technical discussion that followed was complex but productive. Dr. Caldwell acknowledged that Sarah's analysis had identified real design limitations that weren't apparent under laboratory conditions. Her practical testing approach had revealed problems that could significantly impact operational effectiveness. I have to admit, Ms. Martinez, your evaluation methodology is more comprehensive than our internal testing, Dr. Caldwell said. We'll need to revise our design to address these thermal expansion issues. Colonel Harrison had watched this exchange with obvious satisfaction. The confrontation between the manufacturer's representative and the Pentagon analyst had resulted in a clear validation of Sarah's work and methodology. However, as the formal testing concluded, Dr. Caldwell made an observation that would lead to an unexpected development. Ms. Martinez, he said, your technical analysis is excellent, but I'm curious about your practical shooting skills. Have you actually fired this weapon yourself? Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. I've examined it thoroughly and observed extensive testing by qualified operators. But you haven't personally fired it. That wasn't part of my evaluation protocol, Sarah replied carefully. Dr. Caldwell exchanged glances with Colonel Harrison. It seems to me that a complete evaluation should include personal experience with the weapon's handling characteristics. How can you fully assess a rifle without understanding how it feels to actually use it? This challenge put Sarah in an awkward position. Her evaluation had been based on scientific analysis and observation of qualified operators, which was the standard approach for technical assessments. However, Dr. Caldwell was suggesting that her lack of personal experience with a weapon represented a limitation in her methodology. Colonel Harrison seemed to consider this point seriously. Doctor, are you suggesting that Ms. Martinez should personally test the weapon to complete her evaluation? I'm suggesting that a thorough assessment should include understanding the weapon from the user's perspective, Dr. Caldwell replied. How can she recommend for or against adoption without experiencing the weapon's handling characteristics herself? Tank Thompson had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Ma'am, he said to Sarah, would you be willing to try some shooting yourself? It might give you additional insights for your report. Sarah found herself facing an unexpected challenge. She had mentioned her background in competitive shooting during previous conversations, but she had never intended to demonstrate her skills in this context. Her role was that of an analyst, not an operator. I suppose I could conduct some basic testing, she said cautiously, though I should point out that my shooting experience is primarily in competitive disciplines rather than tactical applications. Colonel Harrison's expression suggested that he was curious to see how Sarah would perform. We can set up a basic marksmanship test. Nothing too complex, just enough to give you personal experience with the weapon's characteristics. The suggestion seemed reasonable on the surface, but Sarah sensed there was more to this development than simple scientific completeness. Dr. Caldwell appeared to be challenging not just her methodology, but her overall credibility as a weapons evaluator. What kind of test did you have in mind? She asked. Just some basic shooting at various ranges, Colonel Harrison replied. We can start with static targets and see how you adapt to the rifle's characteristics. As they prepared for this unexpected development, Sarah realized that her evaluation was about to take a dramatically different direction. What had begun as a scientific assessment was now becoming a personal test of her capabilities. Tank began setting up targets at different ranges, while Dr. Caldwell and his team prepared to observe and document Sarah's performance. The atmosphere had shifted from technical discussion to something approaching a practical examination. Are you comfortable with this, ma'am? Rodriguez asked quietly as Sarah prepared to handle the rifle. You don't have to prove anything to these people. Sarah appreciated his concern, but she also recognized that backing down from this challenge might undermine the credibility of her entire evaluation. If she was going to recommend against adoption of this weapon system, she needed to be able to defend her position from every possible angle. I'll be fine, she assured him, though privately she felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Her competitive shooting experience was extensive, but this situation was entirely different from anything she had encountered before. As she approached the firing line, Sarah was acutely aware that every SEAL on the range was watching her with intense curiosity. These men were among the most skilled marksmen in the world, and they were about to see whether the civilian analyst who had criticized their new weapon could actually shoot with any competence herself. The challenge that was about to unfold would test not only her technical knowledge, but also her practical skills under pressure. Sarah had no way of knowing that her performance over the next hour would completely transform how everyone at the facility viewed both her and her evaluation of the weapon system. Sarah approached the firing line with measured confidence, though her heart rate had increased noticeably. She had competed in shooting sports for over 15 years, but this was entirely different from any competitive environment she had experienced. The weight of professional scrutiny from some of the world's most elite marksmen created a pressure that had nothing to do with her technical expertise. We'll start with some basic shooting at 100 yards, Tank announced, setting up the first target, just to get you familiar with the weapon's characteristics. Sarah nodded and began her pre-shooting routine, the same systematic approach she used in competition. She examined the rifle carefully, checking the sight settings and familiarizing herself with the trigger and safety mechanisms. Her movements were methodical and confident, reflecting years of ingrained habits. Dr. Caldwell watched her preparations with obvious skepticism. "Take your time, Ms. Martinez. There's no pressure here." Despite his words, Sarah could sense that everyone present understood the significance of this moment. Her credibility as an evaluator was about to be tested in the most direct way possible. She settled into a prone shooting position, adjusting her body alignment with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her technique. The rifle felt solid and well-balanced, though she could immediately sense some of the handling characteristics she had observed during her technical evaluation. Her first shot broke cleanly, and the bullet impacted the target near the center of the bullseye. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it was well within the accuracy standards expected for this type of weapon. Sarah worked the bolt smoothly and prepared for her second shot. "Not bad," Tank commented, observing through his binoculars. "She's got decent form." Sarah continued shooting slowly and deliberately, focusing on maintaining consistent technique while gathering her own impressions of the weapon's performance. Each shot provided her with additional data about the rifle's handling characteristics that complemented her technical analysis. After 10 shots, Tank called a ceasefire and they examined the target. Sarah's group was respectable, showing accuracy that would have been acceptable for most military applications. However, she wasn't satisfied with her performance and suspected she could do better once she fully adapted to the rifle's characteristics. "How does it feel compared to your usual competition rifles?" Rodriguez asked with genuine curiosity. "Heavier than what I'm used to," Sarah replied, "and the trigger has a different character. But the basic accuracy potential is definitely there." Colonel Harrison studied the target thoughtfully. "That's solid shooting, Ms. Martinez. Ready to try it at a longer range." They moved to the 300-yard line, where the targets appeared significantly smaller and more challenging. This range would provide a better test of both the weapon's precision and Sarah's ability to adapt to its characteristics. As Sarah prepared for the longer-range shooting, she made several adjustments to her technique based on what she had learned during the initial test. Her competitive experience had taught her to analyze and adapt to new equipment quickly. Her first shot at 300 yards hit the target cleanly, though not in the exact center she had been aiming for. The second shot was closer to her intended point of impact, and by the third shot, she was beginning to understand the rifle's particular characteristics. "She's learning the weapon," Tank observed to Colonel Harrison. "Watch how she's adjusting her hold and sight picture." Sarah was indeed making subtle modifications to her technique, drawing on her competitive experience to adapt to the rifle's unique handling requirements. This process of rapid adaptation was one of the skills that had made her successful in competitive shooting. By her seventh shot, Sarah had found her rhythm with the weapon. Her shots began grouping more tightly around the center of the target, demonstrating both the rifle's accuracy potential and her own ability to exploit it effectively. Dr. Caldwell watched with growing surprise as Sarah's shooting improved dramatically. Her final 3 shots formed a tight cluster that would have been impressive even from an experienced military marksman. "That's excellent shooting," he admitted reluctantly. "You've clearly got significant experience with precision rifles." Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she realized she was performing well under these challenging circumstances. Her years of competitive shooting were translating effectively to this new environment, despite the different equipment and pressure. "Let's try something more challenging," Colonel Harrison suggested. "How about some shooting at 500 yards? This suggestion raised the stakes considerably. 500 yards was a distance that challenged even experienced military marksmen, requiring precise technique and thorough understanding of ballistics principles. As they moved to the longer range, Sarah began to feel more comfortable with the situation. The technical aspects of long-range shooting were areas where her academic knowledge complemented her practical skills effectively. The 500-yard targets appeared tiny through the rifle's scope, requiring careful attention to sight picture and trigger control. Sarah took her time preparing for each shot, applying the same methodical approach she used in long-range competitive events. Her first shot at the extended range hit the target cleanly, though the impact was slightly lower than she had intended. She made a quick adjustment to her sight picture and fired again. The second shot was much closer to the center. "She knows what she's doing," Tank commented to the other SEALs who had gathered to watch. "Look at how she's making corrections between shots." Sarah's competitive training had taught her to analyze each shot and make precise adjustments for the next one. This skill was proving invaluable as she adapted to the longer range and the rifle's ballistic characteristics. Her third shot was nearly perfect, hitting within inches of the target center. The fourth and fifth shots grouped closely around the same point, demonstrating remarkable consistency at this challenging distance. "Outstanding shooting," Rodriguez said with genuine admiration. "That's SEAL-quality accuracy at 500 yards. Dr. Caldwell was clearly struggling to reconcile Sarah's demonstrated shooting skills with his initial assumptions about civilian analysts. Her performance was far exceeding his expectations and undermining his challenge to her credibility. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "I have to ask, what exactly is your background in competitive shooting?" Sarah finished her string of shots before responding. "I've competed in national match events and long-range precision disciplines for about 15 years. My father was my first instructor, and I've continued training throughout my career." This revelation put her technical expertise in a new context. She wasn't simply an academic who studied ballistics theoretically. She was someone who understood weapons performance from both scientific and practical perspectives. Colonel Harrison had been observing the entire demonstration with obvious interest. As Sarah completed her shooting at 500 yards, he made a suggestion that surprised everyone present. "Ms. Martinez, I'd like to propose one final test. We have a practical shooting course that we use for SEAL training. It involves multiple targets at varying distances with movement between shooting positions. Would you be interested in trying it?" This was a significant escalation from the static target shooting they had been conducting. A practical course would test not only marksmanship skills, but also the ability to handle a weapon effectively under more dynamic conditions. Tank looked concerned about this suggestion. "Sir, that course is designed for trained operators. It might be too challenging for someone without tactical training." Sarah considered the proposal carefully. She had no experience with tactical shooting scenarios, but her competitive background included some disciplines that required movement between shooting positions. "What would the course involve?" she asked. Colonel Harrison explained that the course included 6 shooting positions at ranges from 100 to 400 yards, with different target types and time limits for each stage. It was designed to test both accuracy and speed under moderate pressure. "I'm willing to try it," Sarah said, surprising herself with her willingness to accept this challenge. "Though I should point out that I have no tactical training. We'll modify the course to focus on marksmanship rather than tactical movement," the colonel assured her. "The goal is to see how you handle the weapon under more dynamic conditions." As they set up the practical course, word spread throughout the base that a civilian analyst was about to attempt a SEAL training exercise. By the time Sarah was ready to begin, a significant crowd of operators had gathered to observe. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah found herself drawing on mental preparation techniques she had learned in competitive shooting. She focused on treating each stage as a separate problem to be solved rather than worrying about the overall performance. The first stage involved engaging 5 targets at 200 yards from a standing position. Sarah approached it methodically, taking time to establish proper sight picture for each shot. Her accuracy was excellent, hitting 4 of the 5 targets in their scoring zones. "Strong start," Tank commented as Sarah moved to the second position. The second stage required shooting from a kneeling position at 300-yard targets. This was more challenging due to the less stable shooting platform, but Sarah's competitive experience included extensive practice for various positions. She hit 3 of the 4 targets cleanly, with 1 shot just missing the scoring zone. Her technique remained smooth and controlled despite the increasing difficulty. The third stage presented the greatest challenge: prone shooting at 400-yard targets with a time limit that required faster shot delivery than Sarah was comfortable with. This stage would test her ability to balance speed with accuracy. Sarah approached this stage by finding the fastest pace she could maintain while keeping her shots accurate. She sacrificed some precision for speed, but managed to hit 2 of the 3 targets within the time limit. Excellent adaptation, Rodriguez observed. She's figuring out how to manage the time pressure. The remaining stages continued to challenge different aspects of Sarah's shooting skills. By the time she completed the course, she had demonstrated competence that exceeded everyone's expectations for a civilian analyst. The final results showed that Sarah had successfully engaged most of the targets with accuracy that would have been respectable even for a military marksman. Her performance wasn't perfect, but it was far better than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Caldwell approached Sarah as she finished the course. His attitude completely changed from the skepticism he had displayed earlier. "Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I questioned your ability to evaluate our weapon system because I assumed you lacked practical shooting experience. Your demonstration today has shown that you understand firearms performance from both theoretical and practical perspectives." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction at this acknowledgement, but she remained modest in her response. "Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. I hope this helps validate the concerns I raised about your rifle system." Colonel Harrison stepped forward to address the assembled group. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today is exceptional shooting from someone who is not a military marksman. Ms. Martinez has demonstrated that her evaluation of our weapons is based on genuine expertise." The crowd of SEALs began to disperse, but many stopped to congratulate Sarah on her performance. Their attitude toward her had shifted dramatically from polite skepticism to genuine respect. Tank approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Ma'am, I have to say, when you first arrived here, none of us expected what we just witnessed. You've earned some serious respect today." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was more focused on the implications for her evaluation. "I hope this demonstration reinforces the validity of my technical analysis. The problems I identified with the rifle system are real and need to be addressed." Dr. Caldwell nodded agreement. "Your analysis was thorough and accurate. We'll need to redesign the barrel mounting system to address the thermal expansion issues you documented. This will require some significant modifications to our production process." As the day concluded, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved. What had begun as a routine technical evaluation had become a personal test of her credibility and capabilities. Her performance had validated not only her shooting skills, but also the methodology she had used to assess the weapon system. Colonel Harrison accompanied her as she gathered her equipment. "Ms. Martinez, your evaluation has been the most comprehensive assessment we've received for any weapon system. Your combination of technical knowledge and practical experience has provided insights that we wouldn't have gotten from a purely academic analysis." Sarah felt proud of what she had accomplished, but she also understood the broader implications of her work. The most important thing is that your operators get weapons that will perform reliably when their lives depend on it. That's what this evaluation was really about. As she prepared to leave the base for the final time, Sarah knew that her report would recommend against adoption of the rifle system in its current form. However, her work had also demonstrated that the fundamental design could be salvaged with appropriate modifications. The experience had challenged her in ways she hadn't expected, forcing her to prove her expertise through both technical analysis and practical demonstration. She had met that challenge successfully, earning respect from some of the most elite warriors in the military while maintaining the scientific objectivity required for effective evaluation. Dr. Caldwell's company would need to invest significant resources to address the problems she had identified, but the potential result would be a weapon system that could truly meet the demanding requirements of special operations forces. Sarah's evaluation had accomplished its primary goal, ensuring that America's most elite warriors would have equipment that matched their exceptional capabilities and dedication to their mission.